being a scientist, you look at the facts.
Yeah.
And you've made a lot of waves by saying there are only two genders, and that gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
I think that gender dysphoria, especially in kids, is a mental health condition and should be treated as such. And I do not believe it is compassionate to affirm that kid's confusion. I believe that is cruelty. I believe 20 years from now, we will look back at allowing kids to undergo genital mutilation and chemical castration in the way that we would also judge Iran for doing the same thing. In Iran, if you're gay, you know what they do? They make you undergo genital mutilation and sex change. I think many gay kids are going through the same thing today because of the trans fixation in really American culture right now. You know, a lot of intense moods there, but I stand by everything I said, which is, just think about this logically. So the same LGBTQIA plus movement that says that the sex of the person you're attracted to is hardwired on the day you're born. That was a core premise of the gay rights movement. It had to be for it to count as a civil right, that it was an immutable characteristic. The sex of the person you're attracted to is hardwired at birth. And if you believe in anything otherwise, you're a bigot. That's the same movement that says that now your own biological sex is actually totally fluid over your life. Those two things can't make sense at the same time. There is no gay gene, there is no gay chromosome. You have definitive sex chromosomes, two X chromosomes, you're a woman, an X and a Y, you're a man, and yet that's the one that you're asked to believe is totally fluid over your life. And so you can't believe these contradictory things if you're applying rules of logic or science. You can if you're subscribing to a new kind of religion. And calling it a religion is generous because religions have withstood the test of time, but a new kind of cult in the country. My goal is not to demonize the people who may suffer from actual mental health disorders. When a kid says that my gender is different from my biological sex, I don't think the right thing to do is to scold them or make fun of them. I think they are generally asking for help, actually. And I don't think that affirming that child's confusion is compassion. I think that is a form of cruelty. And so I do think that we ought to do a better job. Sometimes when we're heated, myself included, can forget the compassion side of that. And we get so focused on sparring and winning the debate. But we're not just in this to win the debate. We're in this to actually win our country back. We have to be strong enough to also protect our kindness. And I think you gotta have both of those things, because it turns out your enemy is actually, in many cases, our fellow citizen who just needs to be led and sometimes needs a little extra help.
Well, the United States is pretty much an outlier regarding gender-affirming care for children right now, because the research, the data, particularly a huge longitudinal study that has just come out in the UK, and those countries in Europe have altered their position right now. And the United States, with the American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Association, that have endorsed this gender-affirming care, which, by the way, is a marketing term. It's not a
It's gender-denying care is what it is, actually.
I mean, the United States is an outlier that seems to have caved to pressure from the tyranny of the fringe. And I'm certainly not judging those who choose to live that lifestyle, but to deny science to justify it and demand others do the same thing is a different story.
My own view is that you are free to live your life how you want, marry who you want, if you want, identify how you want, dress how you want. It's a free country. That's what makes America beautiful and great. You're free to do that as long as you're not imposing that on somebody else to constrain the way they live their lives or the way they educate their children. And the kids is where I draw the line, because kids aren't fully formed adults. But once you're a fully formed adult, totally fair game. Kids, not fair game.
I've talked to many fully formed adults in the transgender community that say, those activists don't speak for me. I wish they would zip it and just let me live my life.
And by the way, if you call it a mental health condition, they say that that's actually demonizing kids who may be transgender. I think actually also misses a different point. It's actually just another symptom of a deeper mental health epidemic that we actually need to address in this country, which I think goes back to that deficit of purpose. And I don't think we're gonna fix it by just bending the knee to this new ideology. I think the compassionate thing to do is get to that root cause And that's what I favor doing. I think that we all have to have the courage to be able to speak about it in the open to actually get there.
Well, but if you say something about it, you're immediately transphobic, or it's like you say about racism, the cost of calling somebody a racist is very low. The cost of being labeled a racist is very high.
Yes.
You and I share a real passion for immigration laws, and in particular, protecting people from human trafficking. And earlier this year, I went to Eagle Pass, and I spoke to Brandon Judd, president of the National Border Patrol Council, to find out exactly what is happening there with regard to children. These children that are coming in with someone that says, I'm their mother, aunt, uncle, or whatever, we have no way of verifying that.
We do not. We used to. Under President Trump, we had rapid DNA testing. That's been done away with.
Are they given money, these people that are released into the country?
So it's our taxpayers that ultimately facilitate the travel. But yes, travel is facilitated, and they are given all the necessities that they need.
But that could be a trafficker.
There's a very good possibility that they're being trafficked, that they're going into the sex industry, or they're being forced into the sweatshops.
And we know that. We knowingly are spending our tax dollars to sell children into sex trafficking. How, under any theory, is that okay for us to be spending tax dollars to traffic children? This is the president of the Border Patrol, and he just confirmed and has to me on more than one occasion that we are spending United States tax dollars to knowingly send children to an address they know is a trafficking hub.
Yep.
But they say they don't have the resources to check it out or to reroute or change. And we're trafficking these children into sweatshops, known prostitution rings, which we wouldn't be doing if we had a border.
Absolutely. This is not compassion to anybody. This is cruelty. So I visited Eagle Pass as well. I personally watched a father and his about 11-year-old daughter cross. He was in shock afterwards, like his body was in physical shock. He was laid out. They had a stretcher ready for him. They knew what kind of condition he was in. They took him away. She's sitting under a bridge, doesn't speak English, no idea where her father is, not speaking the language. That's not compassion to this young woman, that is cruelty. What do you think if you're gonna have an open border? Cartels are gonna have a field day, transporting and trafficking children and other slaves, it's what they are, into the country, and fentanyl and drugs that are a scourge across the country. And then when there's a reactionary backlash to that, you call that, oh, that's divisive rhetoric. That's the trick. Well, what was really divisive was the bad policy in the first place. Same thing you see in the anti-racist arena, right? There's no better way to cause racism in this country than to take something away from somebody else on the basis of their skin color. It provokes that backlash. And that's exactly what I think is going on with these immigration policies is it is a divide and conquer agenda where you dump a bunch of unprepared migrants onto a community, use them as political pawns. When that community reacts, you get to label them as racist, xenophobic, wrong-headed Americans. And, I think that is going to tear the country to its breaking point unless we have leaders who not only correct the policies, but remind us of who we really are.
Well, you say in the book about the anti-racist activists today that if we embrace Martin Luther King's vision of his day, that makes you a racist today.
Of course it does.
He called for us to be colorblind.
He said, I hope my 4 children grow up in a country where they are judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And yet today, Ibram Kendi, I'm quoting direct, says that the remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. His words, not mine. And there's something strange going on across all of these subjects. It's interesting, right? I'm not saying this in an angry way. Back to that sense of just curiosity of what's actually going on in the country. Martin Luther King said, we will get to that promised land. I may not get there with you. That's what he said. It's right when we have reached the doorstep of the promised land that Martin Luther King envisioned that we start inventing these more histrionic theories about invisible systemic racism that actually doesn't exist. You put a systemic in front of it, that's just a different way of saying it doesn't exist. And the same thing with respect, it's right in the moment in American history when you're free to marry who you want, regardless of whether it's same sex or not. that you then come up with this new tirade about whether or not your gender was actually matching your biological sex at birth. And so what's going on there? We as human beings, we have to believe in something bigger than ourselves. We're hungry to be part of something bigger, and yet we can't even answer what it means to be an American. And so I predict that until we fix that deeper deficit of purpose, we're just gonna see the next thing. It's COVID, to climate, to race, to transgenderism, to sexuality, and I think we have to confront that head on. Otherwise, it's just gonna be one step of playing whack-a-mole from behind, one step at a time. It's one of the realizations I've had over the last year.